Well, how's everybody doing? It's that time. It's Saturday, 3 o'clock, and it's time for the Concerned Forum. And I'm your host, Bob Gumbs. And, oh goodness, there's just so much to talk about that's happened over this past week. And, you know, it's hard because you want to try and avoid constantly having to talk about His Excellency, Booba the First, down in D.C. Of course, I'm talking about no one other than the great Donald Trump. And we know he's great because he tells us he is. And there are other things going on in the world besides him inhabiting the White House. Unfortunately, believe it or not, they're not as important. That's what happens when you put a buffoon in the position where he practically has unlimited power on the planet. The North Korean situation, for example, that's something that he has entirely blown to bits. I think he's waiting when everybody's back is turned, and very quickly he's going to get the football and launch an attack. We know that that's what he has in his mind. How do we know that? Well, because he's told us so. See, it's funny. There are a group of people, I don't want to say many people, but there are a lot of people in this country that I don't know what the problem is. A language barrier, a barrier to understanding. I can't call it. But what I mean by that is that you have people that when somebody tells them something, they refuse to believe it. And I refer to many of these people that actually voted for Donald Trump. Now, this guy practically came out with a sign saying, "Elect me, I am a buffoon." And that's exactly what many people did. They voted for this guy. They didn't elect him because, as I keep telling folks time and time again, Donald Trump was not an elected president. It's just like Bush Jr. in his first term. Donald Trump was selected by the Electoral College. He was not elected by the mass majority of the voters in these United States. Now, it's just that damn simple. Which, by the way, is also a source of many of the problems that we have in this country with him. Because the fact that he knows he was rejected by the majority of the electorate in this country, I mean, literally drives him up the wall. I would not be surprised if they take time out in the White House, if they take an hour and they close the doors and they close all the curtains and they let Donald just start grabbing a piece of carpet and just start chewing on it, all right? Because the fact that he was thoroughly rejected by the majority of the folks in this country, as I said, it drives him up the damn wall. The majority of people that did vote voted for someone else. They either voted for Hillary, they voted, what was that, Libertarian, or they voted Green Party. Now, those are the people that voted. And we're not even counting those people that didn't bother to vote. okay? And that drives me crazy. Now, another very sad aspect to Trump being in the White House is that here in America we seem to have forgotten what reality means. I'm not going to be one of those people that will come out and say, oh, well, I long for the good old days of honest office holders and when integrity and kindness and blah, 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 when that all meant something. Well, guess what, folks? People that talk like that, they're yearning for something that never existed, okay? They're playing around with what I would call false memory. Now, were there people that stood up with integrity, for honesty, for doing the right thing? Yes, there was. Right off the top of my head, I think of John Brown. Extremely courageous. That's the white guy from New York State that spent his time, him and his sons, taking arms and fighting for the freedom of black people in America, in Kansas, and then ultimately in Virginia. Well, what we now know is West Virginia, but at the time that was still Virginia, a place called Harper's Ferry. The main idea was to raid the federal arsenal there, where ammunition and weapons were kept, and to distribute them amongst the slaves throughout that section of Virginia, was that close to the Shenandoah Valley, and ultimately lead the revolution, ending slavery in America. Not peacefully, but by arming the African slaves. Now, he was betrayed, unfortunately, by I can't remember if the guy was a free black or if he was still a slave black, but he was a servant, if I'm not mistaken, and he blew the whistle. And that's why the raid of John Brown on Harper's Ferry failed. But that's an example of an American that died for American principles, freedom, self-determination, and I remember people like that when you talk about people, Americans, trying to live up to a high standard. But by the same token, at that same time, you had other Americans that were selling human beings, who, by the way, they did that because they did not consider the black people that they were selling to be human beings. They were simply chattel. And I would not say that those were good people. Although, I guess, according to the lights of that society at that time, they could have been cool people, you know, patted their kid on the head. They were nice to their mother. But the deeper meaning of what it means to be a good American, well, apparently we see different. That's the problem when people try to reach back, talking about, oh, well, back in the good old days, people had respect and blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I don't see it. I'm sorry. I think that there were things that some people, maybe the people who were the majority at that time, their values, their ideas, were what it was all about. In other words, if you look at that time, okay, we're talking what, 1859, 1860, right before the war started, Civil War started. Are you harking back to that time period? You know, evangelicals that come on, especially those guys that come on TV, they do this crap all the time. You know, and they talk about, well, we need to go back to an America the way we used to be. Well, you used to sell people. You used to buy and sell people. Now, is that what you're referring to? And, you know, you never get a clear answer from people that talk this nonsense. Now, I was very disappointed when I heard, I'm referring, of course, to what Donald did. 4 of our servicemen were killed in a combat action in a place in West Africa called Niger, Niger. Now that's like Northwest Africa, okay? The problem is that, well, I'm sure you've been following the news, right? You say yes. Okay. The problem is that we have a situation, really since 9/11. And that situation is you have radical groups, okay, that have been spawned a second time. Now, what do I mean by a second time? Well, what I'm going to try and do in the short period of time that I have, I'm going to try and make you aware of what Donald Trump is and is not doing, okay? In other words, what he is and what he ain't. And at the same time, I'm going to try and give you a little background into the significance of him doing or not doing. Because I think that's one of the sorry things that I find in this country with the American public, in that we're not made aware enough of not only what the hell's going on in the world, but also what's going on in this country, hell, even our local metropolitan area. But at this point, we're talking national and international, and what's going on with that. Now, I can assure you, if we were in Marseille or Paris or Madrid or Berlin or London, folks would know, or in Rome, people would know what the hell's going on and what's up with Niger. I'm fortunate, or I wouldn't say fortunate, but I'm lucky because I was able to receive a background in much of this stuff because when I was in the Navy, I had the opportunity, spent 5 years as an intelligence technician assigned to DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. That's the same agency, by the way, where President Obama had that guy, General Flynn, the one that's in so much hot water now for possibly dealing with the Russians during the Trump presidential campaign. Well, he used to run that agency. That's an intelligence agency. And as I said, I spent 5 years of my shore duty assigned as an intelligence technician there, doing top secret administrative functions. Before that, I had spent 3 years at sea on a nuclear aircraft carrier called the USS Nimitz. And as I said, from there, I was sent to D.C. to do this top secret business. And the problem is that we started off on the bad foot in that part of the world. I talk about the so-called Middle East and Africa. What happened, the Soviets invaded, however you want to put it, because I think in 78, 79, the government of Afghanistan had a very close relationship with what was then the Soviet Union. And you had a fundamentalist Islamist who didn't like that. So basically they went about tearing down the government. We in the United States were very happy about that, because anything to give what was then the Soviet Union, the Russians, what we call it, it was the Soviet Union, the Soviet Empire, anything that gave them headaches, we were happy to contribute. That's how this whole thing really, us getting so deeply involved, that's what started it, quite frankly. Bin Laden, the guy who supposedly launched the attack on the World Trade Center, well, he used to work for us at one time because of the fact that we were supplying him and a bunch of people like him. Mujahideen, okay, that's the group. Now you have Al-Qaeda, ISIS, but all this really came out of the Muslim Brotherhood, okay, which was a reaction to the colonialism of the French, the Brits, and the economic colonialism of the United States. That essentially became the Mujahideen, especially in the Afghanistan region. And to try and make this as short as possible, they were fighting the Soviet Union. They were fighting the Russians, and we were happy to help them. And there was a lot of, at that time, a lot of top secret stuff going down, supplying them with, Stinger missiles, or all this good military hardware. Because we loved the idea of annoying the Russian Empire. And basically, the military/intelligence community, we felt that it was our job to turn Afghanistan, that whole area, we wanted to turn it into Russia's Vietnam. And we did, basically, because you notice after all that stuff that the Russians went through, trying to hold down Afghanistan, the next thing you know, Gorbachev starts taking the brakes off the empire, basically. And the empire began to collapse, right? See, Afghanistan is known in history as the graveyard of empires. I think it was the Romans. The Romans didn't juggle too much in that part, in that part of the world. My God, the Brits, they didn't, they were responsible for Afghanistan. Remember the whole Northwest passes through India and all this good stuff, right? real Rudyard Kipling. Rudyard Kipling, by the way, is a British author who wrote at the turn of the last century all this kind of pro-British Empire stuff, pro-white man's burden. In other words, it was the burden of the civilized race, i.e., white Britannia, to basically maintain a type of control over the darker people of the world, of the less enlightened folks. Hence, they were in Afghanistan, where they were always constantly getting their butt kicked, until finally they reached upon a solution, whereas they would have maybe 1 or 2 administrative agents in a region instead of getting whole armies chewed up. And that's basically how they kept things running, because they felt it was just too much of a burden on any empire to waste men and resources in Afghanistan. Even Kipling came to believe that. Kipling, by the way, he's the guy, he wrote this story. It was just on the movies. What is it? In this area, Metro, where they show the older time movies from the 30s and 40s. Kim, yeah, with Errol Flynn. Kim, right? He wrote that. He wrote Gunga Din. And he wrote that. He wrote a bunch of things. What was that poem everybody quotes? Oh, East is East, and West is West, and never the twain shall meet, till earth and sky stand presently afore God's great judgment seat. Something like that. And you know, that's in that vein, as I said, this whole idea of the white man's burden, okay, of the more enlightened people going around the darker people's countries to basically manage them, as it were, and to, you know, bring them up to a level to what we would call, quote unquote, civilized. Now that's the British white man's burden idea. Sound familiar? Yeah, I thought it did. Well, anyway, what's that got to do with Donald Trump and Niger? Well, you have this situation where after Afghanistan is done, by done, I mean the Russians are basically, you know, they're dragging butt out of there. The United States kind of eases back in that part of the world. I mean, we kept a few spooks. Excuse me. Spooks, by the way, that's a word. That means intel people, James Bond type stuff. Nothing, no racial inclination in that. At best, you could say you have a spook in a given area, and that person's job is to be there, but not be seen, or not to make that much of an imprint, okay? So that's what the term spook is. When you hear an intelligence person talking about spook, it's not nothing racial. You know, that's the thing about America. Race has played such a prominent role in our history that sometimes meanings get mistaken, especially this meaning of race. Oddly enough, because any scientist will tell you there's no such thing as race. You have ethnic groups, cultural groups, what have you. But the idea of a red race, a white race, a black race, That's crap. There's nothing scientific about that. Any scientist will tell you that, okay? Basically, we're all God's children, okay? So that's something else I wanted to pass on. There's no such thing as race. This was something that was thought up actually by people that wanted to keep us separate from each other. But there's no such thing as race. Like I said, you have cultural differences, tribal differences even. But the idea that you're dark, so you're one type of human being, and you over there, you're blonde-haired and your skin is fair or light, and you're another type of human being, is absolute bullshit, okay? And that's the scientific term that I'm using. But no, that was created much more politically and culturally than anything having to do with science. So you can rest your head about that. But as I was saying, so what happens when we get to the point, because you remember, even though America is trying not to make a big imprint in that part of the world, we're still active, very active in certain respects, especially economic. And so when the planes crashed into the World Trade Center, it was basically off to the races again. And we find ourselves in contention, fighting all the people that previously we had supplied. Bin Laden, for example, all these cats. So that's another thing that made this so sticky. And then the whole invasion into Iraq, which was a colossal mistake. It was wrong to invade, and it was wrong. It's like you do something wrong, and then you compound the mistake by doing the wrong. I'll give you an example. We went in there. We shouldn't have done it. Had no business doing it. There was no weapons of mass destruction. We know all that bullshit, okay? But what did we do? You appointed somebody who was basically supposed to be like some kind of a pro-consul. You went in there acting like you were an empire, which of course we are. But see, the whole genius of the American thing is to basically be an empire without acting like an empire. And for some odd, we didn't do that, all right? I guess there were certain reasons you could say, but what we did, we really screwed up. We fired everybody, or I should say the pro-consul who had been appointed to take care of Iraq. He fires everybody. All the police, the army. So you got, in other words, you have a situation where you got a bunch of foreigners, right, coming into your crib, to your turf. You had a job, you were a cop or you were a soldier. And he says, listen, man, you were down with Saddam and his Ba'ath nationalist party. So because of that, you ain't got a job no more, right? So you got this cat, he's like 21, 20, wants to get married, or might already be married. And he's, making, for that area, fairly decent money. Nice piece of chump change, and then boom, that's gone. Hey, unemployment, that's right down the road. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. We don't have an unemployment agency. Oh, well. And in the meantime, you're telling them, hey, we have just turned your life upside down, but you were a cop, you were in the Army. Oh, well, you can keep your weapons. And by the way, there's a big ammo dump 2 blocks down the street. And there's nobody guarding it, you know, for real. Now, what in the hell do you think is going to happen? And see, this is the thing that really amazes me. And it's kind of tied, it is tied up with what happened to those 4, God bless them, those 4 fellow military fellows. You say that there is no kind of, you know, serious, covert type plan or something, right? You know, and I'm wondering, I know damn well you don't expect someone like myself that spent 5 years until to actually believe this bullshit. To actually believe that you were going to invade a country that hasn't done a goddamn thing to you, invade the country, take it over, fire everybody, make them unemployed, everybody that was in the police force or the Army, let them keep their weapons, leave a whole armory out there, right? It's just there, you know, and you're going to have like a skeleton guard at best. All these weapons just laying around. And I repeat, you tell the people, hey, young man, you're unemployed, and there's nothing for you. Maybe there'll be something maybe a year down the road. And you expect people to just sit there, okay? Hell, you don't have to have any experience in intel to realize that whoever done this is a goddamn fool. Tell me, would you sit still for that? No, I don't think you would. As a result of the stupidity of the invasion of Iraq, and not only the moral obscenity of it, but on practical terms, the way it was done, you have a problem. Because what happens, those guys organized, whereas before they were Iraqi. What happens now? Well, they start falling into the whole Sunni Muslim thing. I'm Sunni, you're Shia, blah, blah, blah. And so what you have done, you have turned one of the most advanced countries in that part of the world, and you have turned it into a bloodbath, essentially. Out of that bloodbath, you have all these different groups that come out, right, that are created. You got the what you call it, the ISIS, and you know, you have a few others. And it just boggles my mind, you know, that nobody saw this coming. Al-Qaeda, because if I'm not mistaken, ISIS came out of Al-Qaeda. And you have about, what, 3 or 4 different groups. The worst one that we're talking about now is ISIS, right? ISIS and its big brother Al-Qaeda. And ISIS is much more deadly than Al-Qaeda. And Al-Qaeda, they ain't no slouch. And what they've been doing, they have been basically going, and we'll put it this way, the fire that you lit in Afghanistan, excuse me, well, yeah, Afghanistan and Iraq, okay, that has essentially spread throughout the Islamic world, throughout that part of the Islamic world. And now it's even in Africa. And I do believe it's as far south as Nigeria. Now, Niger is a little above Nigeria. Oh, I got to start bringing my map here. But just picture the map of Africa, okay? And Niger, okay, say this is South Africa, right? Niger is like around here somewhere. Because remember, Africa is huge, okay? Much larger than the United States. You got Niger here, Benin. We also have to talk about the ancient empire of Benin, Timbuktu. All those places with the exotic sounding names, well, they were real and they were fabulous. But we'll get to that, okay? But for right now, just know this. You have ISIS basically radical, what's the proper pronunciation? Radicalization, because I get tongue-tied sometimes. They have radicalized a good amount of people going all the way into Central Africa, because when you're talking about Nigeria, you're talking about going deep, right? So think about it now. Think about, say, not 1/3, say 2/3. Think about what would happen, 2/3 of Africa under the control of governments that are ISIS. All right? Just think about that and what that would look like. And see, that's the problem. Now, as Americans, we should be angry as hell because we have been committed to a war that no one has bothered to tell us about. That's why those 4 young men are dead. God bless them, my fellow comrades in arms. And see, you have to actually sit down and you have to actually think. Why is it that our government would do this? Well, I don't know what, mineral resources? That's what comes to my mind. Uranium, oil. People forget Africa is one of the top 3 most bountiful continents on the planet. You need something, you got it. Africa has so much in abundance: oil, copper, bauxite, uranium, everything that you need to run a modern industrial society. It's there. So once again, think about it. A whole continent like that under the control of radical fundamentalist Islamic people. That is why the United States is there. Now, think about it. This whole situation is under the control of Donald Trump, okay? So now, not only is he trying to start a war with North Korea, right, and Iran, he now is marching around Africa. This is, you know, without bothering to tell the American people. This is what makes this man so dangerous, because you have no idea what this buffoon is going to do next. So now you have the basic setup, okay, what's going on. Trump fears, or I should say, the West, Britain, France, United States, you know, the gang, they fear radicalism in Africa, the breadbasket of the world. Remember, at one time, Africa fed the Roman Empire, okay? So all this stuff that people, you know, oh, well, look at Africa. No. You have problems in Africa because of the fact that those problems are political. You have to also realize that you have leaders in Africa that, quite frankly, are not very good. And if someone were to ask me straight up, what is Africa's biggest problem? I would tell them straight up that their biggest problem is leadership. They have a lack of leadership. They have a lack of coherent, trustworthy leadership. It's no accident that I would say just about every leader in Africa has the money of the country in a London bank account or a Berlin bank account or a bank account in Paris. Not to kick up any old dust, but you know, that's one of the reasons why certain forces in the left did not like Gaddafi. Because Gaddafi did not, if I'm not mistaken, okay, it's my understanding from what I've read that Gaddafi depended upon the West out of all the African nations. And yeah, Libya is an African nation, all right? Tunis is an African nation. Egypt is an African nation. Look at the damn map, okay? And that's something else about Gaddafi. He constantly stressed that point. Libya is an African nation. He always said that. And as I said, out of all the African countries, he asked for help from the West the least amount of any of it. As a matter of fact, he always felt that the West needed him more than he needed the West, which is something to think about. Now, I know I'm a registered Democrat. The person who I supported in the election last year was one of the main people responsible for Gaddafi's downfall. And that was my candidate for president in the election between the Democrats and Republicans. And I supported that person. At this time, all I have to say is that that's something that was done, that my country did, that I strenuously disagree with. I think that Hillary Clinton was wrong to help engineer the downfall and the murder of Omar Gaddafi. I believe that that was wrong. But as I said, that is for another show. Right now we're talking about Niger and those brave young brothers that gave their lives. And yes, the way I feel, all those men were military. And all my military people are brothers and sisters. Period. End of story. Now, you got the basic idea of just what in the hell it was that they were doing over there and the why. Now you have to ask yourself the question and ask your political representative the question, do you want to see the United States playing such a prominent role in Africa? I bring this up because many of us are of some African descent. That's how we came to be here in the United States. Whether we are born in New York or South Carolina or Jamaica or St. Kitts, we are of African descent. And oddly enough, again, to stray away a little bit, let's keep in mind, technically, everyone on the planet is of African descent because science and anthropology tell us that mankind began in Africa. So, to get back to the main point, are you comfortable knowing the history of the last 500 years? Are you comfortable with America, with the West in general, trouncing through Africa? Now, that's not a simple question. Or I should say, that's a simple question, but the answer is probably not going to be that simple. The reason being, yeah, you have a history of colonialism, especially with the British and the French. By the same token, now you have a situation, the Japanese and Chinese are there in Africa, and some Africans and some of the African nations, some of the people are not too happy about that. So you have to ask yourself, is this emerging fight that's happening between the African nations, or I should say the government of some of these African nations, and some of these so-called radical groups, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, what have you? Is it a reaction to former colonialism, or how should I say, this new neo-colonialism that's happening on the continent now? What do you think? You know, some Africans would say, well, yeah, we want Al-Qaeda here to fight the government because we feel the government is essentially selling our nation out to the Chinese or to the French. I mean, what do you think, you know? I think that when you have groups that run around kidnapping young girls, uh, then it stops being a group of liberation, and it becomes a group of gangsters. But see, those are the things that we as Americans, those are political questions that we need to work out. And that's why we should know what the hell is going on. Where are our troops? Why are they there? What are they doing there? And then when you have the commander-in-chief, especially on small missions like that, these small missions that have such huge ramifications, then you have to ask the question, Mr. President, why is it that when we lose one of our military people, one of our sailors, soldiers, or Marines, why is it that you can't make a decent phone call? And I will say right now, having been in the military, having lost friends in the military, Mr. President, just because you never served in the military or served in government, that's no excuse for you to insult the widow of that soldier or the mother of that soldier. Because this whole thing is about you being empathetic enough to pass some human empathy. If one of your children had been slain, regardless of the circumstances, I'm quite sure that there's a way that you would want people to relate to you on the telephone. And with General Kelly, as I started off saying in the beginning, I'm very sad about him. I mean, I didn't know his political persuasions before he went to work in the White House. But as a general officer, as a general naval officer, because remember the Marines are part of the Navy, okay? They're under the Department of the Navy. And what holds true for them also holds true for sailors. And quite frankly, this whole thing might have been better done if you yourself had made the call. I understand that the idea of the commander-in-chief, but General, you've been around this guy for a while. You know damn well that he's not capable of living up to what a commander-in-chief is supposed to be all about. You know that. And then, sir, you have a reputation for honesty, discipline, honesty, integrity. Now we have to say that you had that reputation, because the things that you said about that Congresswoman were a lie. And we have it on tape. It's not a question of he say, she say. It's a question of looking at the damn tape. And General, that's why I say you really hurt me as a member of the military. Because whether or not, as far as I'm concerned, you come out of the military, that you are always a military person. Especially if you start talking about people that spent 20, 30 years, right? You are always military, whether you like it or not. It might be in different branches. That makes no difference. And as a military person, I really feel hurt by what you did, because you lied, and there was no reason to lie. Your president, your commander-in-chief, made a very bad phone call. And he did it in such a way so that it was hurtful. It's just that simple. And you made everything worse by coming on that podium and talking about things that never really existed. When in the hell do you remember women, aside maybe from your mom or your wife, when do you remember women being taken as sacred? You come out of Boston, the tough side of Boston. What about all the beatings? As someone pointed out on the media the other night, those were incredibly rough times for women. You're talking about back in the 40s and 50s, when a woman has her husband beating the crap out of her, and the priest is telling her, no, you can't divorce because then you'll be excommunicated. And the woman has kids. She doesn't want to be cast adrift from her community. And yet you're going to sit up there and say, like it was some kind of glory time for women, that they were honored. That doesn't sound like someone that's being honored. And, you know, you talk about things, you do that same thing, that business about going down memory lane, a memory lane that really doesn't exist. People had it hard back in the 40s and 50s. It was just starting to get better. I hate to say it, but thanks to Franklin Delano Roosevelt in World War II. You know, there were no blacks in the Marine Corps, for example, before World War II. It's funny, they started off being in the Corps, but that all changed with a federal law that was written in 1793, basically prescribing who could serve in what branch. A funny thing, they didn't say it was wrong for blacks to be in the Navy, but they could not be Marines. And there was a reason for that, because the Marines started out being seagoing cops. Not only did they have to fight the enemy, but they also had to keep order on the ship. And I guess those boys in D.C. in 1790, whatever, what was it, 1793? 94, I guess, or 1798, I believe. I have to look that up again. But the idea of black men telling white men what to do and throwing them in the brig legally, I guess that was a little bit too much for them to swallow. I mean, I just say all that to say, please don't tell me about the quote-unquote good old days. Because what you might remember as being the good old days, they weren't good for everyone. And for you to talk about that female congresswoman like you did, that was wrong. Your president is the one that caused this, not her. Folks, that's going to be it for the day on the Concerned Forum. I hope I've been at least a little informative. And I thank you for inviting me into your home. And I look forward to speaking with you next weekend, next Saturday, same time, same place. Listen, from the Concerned Forum, this is Bob Gumbs. Continue to have a great weekend. See you next week.